You ever hear of the fortress of Helmgart? For 2 weeks, 900 state troops held their own against 2,000 Bretonnian knights. They chose to use their mighty cannons over a foolish field battle. And the knights, where are they now? You're looking at them, peasant.
Baby, don't you know it? I'm hardly heroic. Baby, let's roll it, 'cause I'm hardly heroic.
Pancreasnowork is not just the title for someone in need of insulin. It's also the name of a channel I quite like and would recommend for lore videos about Warhammer, especially Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer Fantasy is in a bit of a limbo state until the Old World comes out, and then every lore tuber will jump aboard that hype train. But Pancreasnowork, or Pancreas as I'll call him, was doing that well before it was cool. I do, however, have a bone to pick with old Pancreas for his video about Bretonnia. While I will be showing clips from his video, I've included the link to it so that you can watch the whole thing if you're so inclined. Despite the nature of his videos, I do think that Pancreas aims to make some serious points in his videos.
Second, every single one of them fucks horses.
Okay, well, mostly serious points. Either way, this video is mostly just to offer an alternative perspective on Bretonnia while also indulging my passion for Warhammer Fantasy. If you hate Bretonnia, by all means, continue to do so. I don't think this video will necessarily change your mind. However, if you are interested in rethinking your perspective on Bretonnia, do watch on. The way I see it, Pancreas makes a couple of main points about Bretonnia, and we'll try to go through the more important ones one by one.
With some reasons. First off, look at these stupid idiots. Do you see anything wrong here? These losers don't even know what time period they're living in, fucking morons. What, did they miss the part where the calendar in fantasy was at like 2517? Look at me, I'm too good for things like technological innovation or the Industrial Revolution and its consequences.
His first argument, and probably the strongest, is about the technological stagnation in Bretonnia, especially in comparison to its cousin, the Empire. In a setting like Warhammer Fantasy, it is rather strange to have two neighboring nations like the Empire and Bretonnia who are right next to each other and yet diverge so radically on technology. As Pancreas points out, one reason why Bretonnia is backwards is because of enforced cultural stagnation. The ruling class of Bretonnia are aware that certain technological improvements would probably upend their feudal order and result in them losing privileges. Of course, I have some opinions about the argument here. Firstly, the Empire also has nobility and firearms, and there are no major revolutions against imperial social order. Just like in the real world, it took a very long time after the invention of firearms for feudalism to actually be challenged by those firearms. The Empire might have firearms, yes, but they're not so reliable or cheap enough that they can form the bulk of their imperial armies. There is still a very pressing and urgent need for melee infantry, and importantly, heavy cavalry in the Empire army. So I don't necessarily fully buy that the Bretonnian nobles entirely keep their land backwards on purpose. I think they know full well that they can retain their elite social and political status even if they had firearms, because of course, the cousins in the Empire do so already. To understand the technological divide between the two nations, I think we have to understand why the Empire got so far ahead. The founding of the Empire is inextricably linked to Sigmar Heldenhammer, who managed to do two particular things that allowed for the creation of his nation, and in particular for that nation to flourish. The first is that he secured eternal friendship with the very large communities of dwarfs in the World's Edge Mountains and surrounding mountains of the borders of the Empire. The dwarfs are the foremost inventors and engineers in the world, no matter what the Skaven tell you, and they were the ones who helped teach metallurgy and building to the nascent tribes of humans who formed the Empire. So already Bretonnia is at a huge disadvantage. There just aren't as many dwarfs who settled in that part of the world. Cooperation with dwarfs, and therefore their knowledge, has to always be mediated at a distance. The Empire was able to piggyback on the dwarfs' technological gains, while the Bretonnians had to struggle a lot more on their own, trying to develop without those resources. Another major difference is probably population size. The geographic size of the Empire is much larger than Bretonnia, and when Sigmar forged the Empire, he called upon a much larger population of people than the founder of Bretonnia, Guy le Breton. As a result, more people means more labor to call upon for both military and industrial purposes. In the Empire, if you have lots of people, you can clear lots of land to settle more people to build up a spiral, whereas in Bretonnia, the population is a lot more dispersed. That's also not to say that Bretonnians are ignorant of technology either. Pancreas speaks of the Bretonnians as if they're organized like an army from the Dark Ages. Bretonnian armies are organized like armies from the High Middle Ages, which means large numbers of heavy cavalry with supporting infantry for said heavy cavalry. If you want to look at somebody who follows a more backwards form of military organization, look at the High Elves, who have spearmen, archers, chariots. The High Elves have a lot more in common with a Bronze Age army than they do a medieval one. I know the lore tends to flip-flop on the exact nature of Bretonnian armor, but there are plenty of descriptions both in-universe and out about Bretonnians wearing imported plate armor, or that Bretonnian armor changes with the seasons. The quality of Bretonnian armor is reputed to be quite high quality. It's obviously not as high quality as the supposed dwarf-forged Imperial plate armor, but remember, this is a setting where a High Elf spearman in full-scale armor has the same armor rating as an Empire soldier with a hat and a shield and no shoes. But for me, the real coffin in this argument is the Bretonnian Navy. So you know how Bretonnians have laws against handguns, supposedly because they're so backward? Well, those don't apply to their navy, which is of course on the grounds that the navy technically isn't on land, per se. Man o' War, the official naval combat wargame for Warhammer Fantasy, spells this out quite clearly, I think. Bretonnians are considered the superior seafarers, unlike the Empire, which still makes use of galleys, which is of course an ancient technology. That is, they use oars on their ships. All Bretonnian ships are powered by sails, and only one of their ships doesn't have cannons, which is not what you would think of for a supposedly primitive nation like Bretonnia. On the sea, Bretonnia rules the waves, not the Empire, which is supposedly the larger, stronger, and more technologically advanced nation. They are very certainly capable of innovation, like their imperial cousins, but they do have a different geographic and cultural context. Speaking of which, that brings us to the second point.
A single horse in Bretonnia will eat better than the village he's in. Everything revolves around horses for these people.
Bretonnian society is pretty horse-obsessed. Okay, I will grant that it is a bit strange. But Bretonnians are not the only people in Warhammer to be obsessed with animals, nor are they the only human race to be obsessed with horses. Firstly, the High Elves. They are absolutely obsessed with animals, especially dragons. The Dragon Princes love dragons so much that they go into battle in armor styled after dragons, riding horses, wearing armor made to look like dragons. Dragons are all over the place. Not to mention, of course, the numerous internal kingdoms for whom the horse is a way of life, like, for example, Tiranoc. There is a lot more granularity to Bretonnia, but we never really see it. A fault that is definitely to be placed at Games Workshop's feet. But there is, of course, another kingdom of humans obsessed with horses, but they don't get quite the same level of gruff, do they? I'm talking about Kislev. Kislev is a society entirely ruled by cavalry and its cavalry elite. The first thing that comes to mind when you think of Kislev are either guys riding bears or guys riding horses, so I don't think it's a fair argument either to give Bretonnia gruff about their cavalry obsession. Kislev weren't as prominent as Bretonnia were in the actual rules of the game, but then again, this is a fault of Games Workshop and the way that they wrote editions. Finally, this brings us to our third argument.
Riding is the true test of manhood, and it gets worse because on top of their culture being horse, their army's ultimate one-hit wonder, and that hit is of course horse. What, you want something other than cavalry? You want a diverse roster like the Empire or High Elves or, I don't know, literally any other faction in the game? Nah man, you get horses and people who eat dirt for nourishment. Let me remind you, they're in a universe where rat people have energy weapons and the dwarves have helicopters like it's the Vietnam War. I mean, even the peasants, who are treated like medieval serfs because that's what they are and all they can ever hope to be, consider horse riding to be the highest form of entertainment.
I hate to break this to you, Pancreas, but lots of army in Warhammer Fantasy only have one good tactic or one general playstyle. Have you tried playing a ranged army of orcs on the tabletop? What about a mobile army of dwarfs? Have you ever seen a dwarf player not build an army around blocks of heavy infantry with a lot of ranged firepower? Yes, it is true that Bretonnia leans in on heavy cavalry, but lots of factions in the game lean in on a single gimmick and provide you with the means for slight adjustments. While there are many armies that will have a lot of diversity in their rosters, like for example Empire, most armies will trade that unit flexibility for unique gimmicks or special powers around a central theme. Orcs have ranged weapons in their army, but they're terrible at it, and if you're relying on ranged weapons to do anything other than blow up in your face, you're not really playing orcs correctly, now are you? Does this mean that Games Workshop should have given every army all the same types of units? I'm not so sure about that. I do think that what they did was make all the different factions play relatively distinctly from each other in both a lore and gameplay sense. Bretonnia are good at cavalry, and speaking as someone who actually played against them on the tabletop, they could be really deadly before Games Workshop changed the rules of the game to buff infantry and nerf cavalry. Bretonnian armies are centered around its heroes as well, which is a rarity for a human nation. They have had options to customize and emphasize their heroes since pretty much their inception, and they do this in ways that no Empire General would ever think would be worth the points. No one's going to spend points on a weapon skill 5 Empire General, but a weapon skill 6 Lord that could be buffed to weapon skill 8, now that is something worth thinking about. There is a hero who could face the very worst Chaos Lord in combat and make them think twice. It doesn't always have to be that we have to beat Chaos by shooting them to death or something else. We can sometimes just have heroes who face down evil face to face and come out and win. I know you'd agreed with me because you like Karl Franz, and I do too. And Karl Franz is a man of action who fights from the front, like, of course, the Bretonnian king and all of the other Bretonnian lords. I think Bretonnia fulfill a specific niche within the Warhammer fantasy world, and I think it's a niche that they ostensibly fill quite well. They are not a sensible society. The Empire isn't sensible either. Bretonnia is like if someone fell asleep watching a King Arthur movie that ended and then a documentary about the 100 Years' War just started autoplaying. Warhammer isn't sensible, but it is heroic, and there surely are no better heroes than those knights from Bretonnia. I hope you enjoyed this video. Why not give the video a like, and if you would like more of this, subscribe to this channel. I definitely had more points, but I wanted to keep this video response short, in the spirit of the original video. Take care and have a nice day.